Friend, Shabbat Shalom to everyone again. Thank you for the opportunity to share some words of Torah with you. And I have quite a gallery of people here tonight. I have Becky and Nathan and Nathan and Becky. That's it.
Quality.
It's cool. No, I mean quality. It'd be nice if we could have. Yeah. Dear friends, I believe there are evil people in the world. That there are some people who are irredeemable. They lack respect for social norms or laws. They lie, they cheat, and deceive others and use others for personal gain. They lack conscience or empathy. They act upon every evil impulse without restraint. They're unable to feel any real remorse. Jewish tradition acknowledges that there's such people. One small example in the biblical tradition, there are this group called the Amalekites who attack viciously women, children, the elderly. After the exodus from Egypt, they are seen as really radically evil and need to be blotted out from the face of the earth. They are such people. In the history of the Jews, one of the most evil Jewish persons ever to live is Bernie Madoff, who died this past week in prison. I don't like to speak about the dead, especially in a negative way, but I must this evening. Let us remember who he was. Through a Ponzi scheme, he swindled thousands of investors, outsmarted regulators, and earned him a 150-year prison term. Mr. Madoff's thousands of victims collectively lost $64.8 billion on paper and saw their lives unended and left in financial ruin following his arrest in 2008. Madoff pleaded guilty in March 2009 to security fraud and other charges, saying he was, quote unquote, deeply sorry and ashamed. That was it. He is exactly what the Torah is referring to in this week's Torah portion when it says, "You shall not steal, you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another." Former investor Tom Fitzmaurice told the judge at his sentencing, he stole from the rich, he stole from the poor, he stole from the in-between. He had no values. He cheated his victims out of their money so he and his wife could live a life of luxury beyond belief. U.S. District Judge Denny Chin sentenced Madoff to the maximum possible term, saying, "Here, the message must be sent that Mr. Madoff's crimes were extraordinarily evil, and that this kind of irresponsible manipulation of the system is not merely a bloodless financial crime that takes place just on paper, but it is instead one that takes staggering human toll." He destroyed people's lives. I know this very specifically. In 2009, I was the rabbi educator of a wonderful congregation in New York City called Temple Israel of the city of New York, 1 block from Park Avenue, a very upscale part of New York's Upper East Side. In the synagogue are many super wealthy people. One in particular was devastated. He and his wife had, because I had been there, I think for a Shiva service or something, he and his wife had this beautiful apartment on Park Avenue. And overnight, he realized that all of his savings, all of his work, had been taken away. Disappeared. To see a person's face after that happens is something that none of us should ever want. Madoff's impact on the Jewish community was astounding. He swindled Hadassah, the Tel Aviv Museum, the American Jewish Congress, Israel Tentis Center, many Jewish federations across the country, Yeshiva University, incredibly sophisticated investors such as Mort Zuckerman. This man even swindled Elie Wiesel's Foundation for Humanity. Mr. Wiesel's charity lost $15.2 million, and he and his wife Marion lost their life savings. And what did Elie Wiesel think of Bernard Madoff? And I quote, "This was a personal tragedy where we discovered all of a sudden what we had done in 40 years. My books, my lectures, everything was gone. Psychopath is too nice of a word for him. Sociopath, psychopath, it means that there is a sickness, a pathology. This man knew what he was doing. I would simply call him a thief, a scoundrel, and a criminal." Madoff was an evil man. So this week, what should his victims do upon hearing his death? Should they rejoice? Should they rejoice? The Talmud would say no. And here is one of several texts that I found that kind of speak to this entire issue. This is, I don't think you've heard this one, but it's very telling and very nuanced. In the Talmud, we find a curious story of a master sage, Rabbi Meir, who was praying for the death of two robbers. His famous wife, Bruria, overheard his prayer and corrected him, quote, from Psalms, "Let sins be uprooted from the earth, and the wicked will do no more." It doesn't say, "Let the sinners be uprooted." Bruria corrected him. It says, "Let the sins be uprooted." You shouldn't pray that these criminals will die. You should pray that they should repent. And then the wicked will be no more. Bruria no doubt understood that the likelihood of these individuals changing was slim. But our response, especially in the format of prayer, would be to rehabilitate rather than to destroy. Rehabilitation? The Talmud is quite moving and idealistic, but come on. Thank goodness I'm a Reformed Jew who is not always bound by Talmudic statements. Forgiveness in Judaism requires certain things. A real awareness of one's crimes, not a forced one. True regret and remorse. Asking forgiveness directly of others. Restitution. In Madoff's case, none of that is possible. First, he was not sorry. His empty words at his trial meant nothing. He was not tormented by his crimes. 5 years into prison, he was interviewed, and he said that the people he conned should have known better, that they didn't ask good questions. He called the whistleblower an idiot, and he reminisced fondly about his days as a financial power player. He was an evil man without conscience. Now, an interesting question was raised to a body of rabbinic authorities within the Reform movement. Should one say Kaddish, the memorial prayer, for a convicted criminal? The answer is somewhat astounding. Any Jew who committed a crime, no matter how grave, must be buried in a Jewish cemetery. The normal honors of eulogy, of kriya, of cutting your cloth to show the mourning period, they all should be withheld. And hold on to your chairs. A child still needs to recite Kaddish for them. The recitation of Kaddish is a way of atoning for the sins of the deceased through one's own good deeds. That doesn't seem possible to me. You say Kaddish for a parent who has shamed you and destroyed your life? One of his Madoff's sons committed suicide, couldn't deal with the suffering and that he had created. If Madoff needed a cemetery plot, it would be hard for me to allow him to be buried in a New Reform Temple cemetery. There are people who lose their rights to be honored and should not be forgiven. In life, they should be treated with civility. You give them food and clothing and shelter and fresh air and religious texts for reading. And you protect them, of course, from violence from other people. But there has to be a limit. Asked what punishment he would like to see for Madoff, Elie Wiesel said at the time, "I would like him to be in solitary cell with only a screen. And on that screen for at least 5 years of his life, every day and every night, there should be pictures of his victims, one after another, all the time a voice saying, 'Look what you have done to this old lady. Look what you have done to that child. Look what you have done. Nothing else.'" But in death, he deserves no honor. My sermon is too much of an honor for him as it is. Now, do not misinterpret my words, or my sentiments, or my theology. I do not think that we should be cold-hearted, cruel, and indifferent people. I do believe, and I've spoken about it, and I believe in my life I've tried to demonstrate it, that we must create every opportunity for a person to own up to their deeds and to repent. Judaism requires this. Our humanity demands this. Forgiveness is sacred when earned. But there are those who cannot repent. They cannot even recognize their own evil. There is no need for forgiveness of them. And accepting that reality is part of establishing standards of morality that are necessary for us to be a civilized society. Forgiveness must be deserved. The course that seems most appropriate is that evil people be held to accountability in the strictest way possible, justice being properly carried out by reasonable, fair-minded people in courts of law. Anything less is a desecration of God's name, an affront to the ethical standards we must all seek in our lives and our world. May the likes of Bernard Madoff be few, and may we punish them before they destroy innocent lives. Shabbat Shalom.